Greetings and welcome to the Introduction to Astronomy. In this week's Misconception in Astronomy, we will talk about the Star of Bethlehem and find out if it was indeed a supernova. So, let's go ahead and get started here. Was the Star of Bethlehem a supernova? Well, I'm going to say probably not, but it is difficult to know for sure. Why? There are a lot of different astronomical possibilities that could account for the Star of Bethlehem. And that includes it being a supernova, but it could also have been a comet or a conjunction, and I might think the other two might be a little more likely. But we can look at some of this here. We can see this image, this drawing shows it pictured as a comet, and we can see others where it is pictured simply as a star. Now, which of these is correct? Well, there's really no way to know. Certainly all of these drawings were done long after the event, and therefore no one had first-hand knowledge of what the star would have looked like. So let's look at some of the astronomical observations that tie into this. And the first, let's look at a possibility of a supernova. There are indeed observations recorded in China in about 5 BC of a comet. Now, this is not that recording shown here. This is actually for a much later comet, over 1,000 years later, and the comet of 1054, which now is known as the Crab Nebula remnant. But recordings were made, so it is possible if a supernova was present that it could have been there and been considered this star, that a bright star would have appeared that would have been visible off in a certain direction at that time. Now, in this case, we also want to look at other observations, which would include things like comets. A bright comet could also look like a star, and in fact, we see something like this when we look at a comet. And in a detailed image and a longer exposure with the camera, we can see the tail of the comet, but the tails are harder to pick out, and if you're looking just with your eye, you would see the head of the comet looking like a very bright star, as well as maybe a small tail stretching back from it. And there was a comet noted also by the Chinese astronomers in 5 BC that ties in roughly to this era. Now, one of the other things that it could be would be a conjunction of planets. Well, conjunctions of planets happen all the time, but really good conjunctions are not as common. So there was a conjunction of planets in 7 BC involving Jupiter and Saturn, and a little while later, in 2 BC, there was a conjunction of Jupiter and Venus, where they were very close together. Now, these are the two brightest planets that you will see in the sky, so getting them very close together will make what looks like a relatively bright star. Venus itself would be the third brightest object in the sky, after our sun and moon. So if you saw that, you would see something that might have looked like this. Now, this is obviously not the conjunction that goes back to 2 BC. This is a more recent one where we can see Jupiter and Venus very close together in the sky. Now, in 2 BC, they were even closer, in fact, to the point where their disks were almost touching, so they would have been merged almost into a single star. And for a while there, would have looked like one single bright star in the sky and could have been mistaken as a star by early people. So was this the result either? Well, I'm going to say we can't rule out any of these specifically, and we'll probably never know what the Star of Bethlehem actually was. But was it definitely any of these? I think we can say for sure that we cannot say that it is obviously any of these, and that they're all possibilities. And depending on the specific timing, which is often used, astronomical events can be used to determine dates in history because they can be determined so precisely. So if there had been more detailed observations of various objects here, we might have been able to tie down specifically as to what it was. But at this point, we will probably never know for sure what this would have been. So let's go ahead and finish up with our summary. And what we've looked at today is that there are several different possible astronomical explanations for the Star of Bethlehem. Among those are being a supernova, comet, or a conjunction of stars, and the actual reason, if any, will likely never be known. So that concludes this week's Misconception in Astronomy on the Star of Bethlehem being a supernova. We'll be back again next week for another Misconception in Astronomy. So until then, have a great day, everyone, and I will see you in class.